NASA will talk to us why they were at the moment not included, and how to include them, and what are the ways to entice them to join the future regime.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Good morning to you all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Excuse me. I'll be addressing the big challenge in the post-2012 negotiations, and that's enticing big emitters to join the post-2012 regime. Few people realize that over 75% of global emissions come from 20 countries, 20 big emitters. Even fewer realize that 55% of global emissions come from big emitters that have no legal obligations under the Kyoto Protocol to limit their emissions. The United States and Canada account for 20%, and developing countries like China, India, and Brazil account for 35%. The Kyoto Protocol is insufficient in this respect, and the post-2012 regime must include an expanded scope for all big emitters to contribute to deep global emissions cuts, or else the most dangerous impacts of climate change, such as those presented regarding sea level rise and ocean resources, will be inevitable. The Bali Action Plan, agreed to in 2007, calls for an international agreement regarding long-term cooperative action post-2012 to prevent climate change, and various parties have introduced proposals on how to enhance cooperative action on mitigation. A successful agreement for cooperative action will address the interests of all parties, including the vulnerable countries, developing countries, and developed countries. An agreement on enhancing cooperative long-term mitigation action will have a number of desired outcomes. Vulnerable parties' risks will be considerably reduced, and this implies that all major emitters, including developing countries, participate and considerably reduce emissions over the medium and long term. The developing countries' sustainable development goals will also be advanced. This implies that there will be transfers of technological and financial resources between parties, and that their sovereignty will not be intruded upon in decisions regarding the scope of such transfers. Finally, developed countries' mitigation costs will be minimized, and this implies that the most cost and carbon-effective mitigation options are available to them to meet their compliance under the new framework. Unfortunately, neither developing nor developed countries are willing to commit to specific legally binding targets for mitigation and resource transfer in a cooperative framework. So a framework is needed to facilitate voluntary cooperative action between developed and developing country parties. A framework around nationally appropriate mitigation actions, or NAMAs, has been proposed and elaborated in the UNFCCC bodies and deserves serious attention. It includes a registry of voluntary cooperative mitigation actions and a partial crediting mechanism. Under this framework, the developing big emitters would be enticed to take voluntary, self-directed actions to limit their emissions in exchange for enabling and supportive technology and finance from developed countries. The flexibility of this framework is very attractive, as NAMAs are nearly limitless in their scope. Countries can choose which policies and actions are appropriate for them. This could include any of the following, such as RED and the renewable energy schemes for carbon importing states, which have been discussed by my colleague. Countries could also create sector-specific targets for improvements in energy-intensive production sectors, like electricity and cement. Developing countries would indicate their intention to take specific actions on the Registry of Voluntary Cooperative Mitigation Actions. It will have transparency as its underlying principle, and seek to balance the interests of all parties by monitoring over time developing country party mitigation commitments and actions, and developed country parties' commitments and contributions of enabling and supportive financial and technological resources. It will also recognize parties for their cooperative mitigation achievements. This recognition should include a partial crediting mechanism, whereby an internationally agreed upon percentage of the reductions achieved through voluntary cooperative action will be credited to developed countries who contribute for their compliance with the binding emission reduction targets. By providing for expanded access to lower cost compliance opportunities in developing countries, this framework may entice developed big emitters like the EU and the United States to take on deep, legally binding emissions limits. In order for this crediting mechanism to have environmental integrity, nationally appropriate mitigation actions in developing countries need to produce measurable, reportable, and verifiable emissions reductions, with a portion of the reductions credited on developed country carbon balance sheets. This framework currently offers the best way to entice all parties to reach an international agreement which will elicit the level of long-term cooperative action from big emitters required to adequately